All right, get ready, because today we're diving deep into the human brain, like really deep.
Deeper than a deep-sea trench.
Deeper, we're tackling Ray Kurzweil's How to Create a Mind. This book, it's trying to unlock the secrets of, well, thinking.
Ah, the mysteries of human thought.
Exactly. And maybe even more than that. Kurzweil seems to think that figuring out the brain could be the key to even, well, creating even smarter machines.
Creating minds, essentially.
He even says that reverse engineering the brain, figuring out how it works, could be the biggest, the most important project in the entire universe.
That's a pretty bold claim.
Bold is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
But that's why we're here, to see if you can back it up.
You know, what I find fascinating is how Kurzweil goes beyond just the biology of the brain. He connects it to, well, the potential of creating AI, artificial intelligence.
AI that could be even smarter than us.
Potentially, yeah.
So hold on, we're not just talking about understanding how we think. We're talking about amplifying our own intelligence and creating something, well, something even more powerful.
It's a huge idea. And it all hinges on his central theory, the pattern recognition theory of mind. PRTM, for short.
PRTM, got it. So he's saying that for all its complexity, our brain, it just operates on pattern recognition.
That's the gist, yeah.
Okay, but pattern recognition, I mean, we recognize patterns all the time, right? Spotting a familiar face in a crowd or knowing a stop sign means stop.
Is he saying that all else thought, even, composing a symphony or solving a math problem, that it all boils down to just recognizing patterns?
That's exactly what he's saying.
I'm having trouble picturing how something as, well, simple as recognizing patterns could lead to something as complex as consciousness.
It is a big leap.
It's like saying a million grains of sand can make a skyscraper. How do you go from these tiny building blocks to something so much greater?
Well, think about how the human brain itself evolved over millions of years, right?
Right, from simple organisms to, well, us. Kurzweil actually traces the evolution of intelligence starting with atoms, just basic atoms bonding to form molecules. Then you have DNA, the complexity of DNA. Then the development of nervous systems, and finally, boom, the human brain.
So each step, it builds on the last, adding another layer of complexity. But where does this pattern recognition fit in?
Kurzweil argues that pattern recognition is the engine driving this whole evolution of intelligence. Each step, you're recognizing new patterns, adapting to them, and then using them to create even more complex patterns.
Okay, I think I'm seeing the connection here.
Yeah.
But what makes human intelligence so unique? I mean, we're not the only species that can recognize patterns, right?
Right. But humans have this unique capacity for hierarchical thinking. We don't just recognize simple patterns, we build on them, organize information in layers. That's how we build complex ideas and knowledge.
Like how letters form words, words form sentences,
Yeah.
sentences make paragraphs, and then you have a whole book. Each layer adds a deeper meaning.
Exactly. And that's what sets us apart. We take those simple patterns and we create this whole other level of meaning, this hierarchical thinking that's key to understanding how we could potentially amplify our own intelligence.
Okay, hold on. Amplify our intelligence, how?
Kurzweil uses a really interesting parallel, Bernoulli's principle.
Bernoulli's principle, that rings a bell.
It's about how air flows over a curved surface.
Right, from physics.
Understanding that one principle led to the creation of airplanes, something that, well, transformed the world.
So he's saying that if we can really grasp how this hierarchical pattern recognition works in our brains, we could be on the verge of something just as revolutionary as flight, that we could unlock capabilities we never even thought possible.
Precisely.
That's a pretty exciting, if not a little daunting thought.
It is, and Kurzweil believes that the key to unlocking all of this lies in the neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for our higher-level thinking, perception, language, even consciousness. It's where this hierarchical thinking really takes off.
But here's where I get a little skeptical. The brain, it's unbelievably complex, right? Billions of neurons firing every second.
It's mind-boggling.
To say that something that intricate can be boiled down to just pattern recognition, that seems like a stretch. Isn't there more to it than that?
It's a fair point, but Kurzweil has this analogy. Imagine a vast forest. If you focus on every single tree and branch, it seems incredibly complex, overwhelming even.
Right, which is too much to take in.
But if you step back, look at the overall structure, you start to see repeating patterns, right? The way the trees are arranged, how branches grow.
So he's saying the brain's complexity, it might be more about the scale of these patterns, not that the fundamental mechanism itself is so complicated.
Exactly. He argues that the fundamental unit of the neocortex is what he calls a pattern recognizer. And these recognizers, They work together in a hierarchy.
It's like a massive orchestra, right? You have all these instruments playing their individual parts, but it's the conductor, the overall pattern that brings it all together into a symphony.
That's a great analogy. And just like an orchestra can create so many different pieces of music from a limited set of instruments, the neocortex can generate this huge range of thoughts and ideas from a surprisingly simple set of building blocks.
Okay, now that makes a little more sense. But how do these pattern recognizers actually recognize anything? What's going on inside each one of these modules?
Well, each one is like a little processing unit.
And how many of these processing units, these pattern recognizers, are we talking about?
Estimates put it at a staggering 300 million in the human brain.
300 million.
Yeah.
Each one capable of processing a piece of a pattern. That's a lot of processing power. But if every thought, every memory, it's just a pattern of these recognizers firing, what does that mean for me, for my consciousness?
Ah, the big question.
It is. But maybe we should hold off on the existential questions for now.
Maybe just a bit.
I'm really curious about how these pattern recognizers actually work, the mechanics of it all. How do they learn, and how do they store information?
Well, let's dive into that then. It all starts with experience. Imagine you're learning to ride a bike. At first, it's all over the place, right? Balancing, steering, pedaling. You fall a lot.
Yeah, I remember those days. Lots of scraped knees.
But with practice, those separate actions, they start to come together, forming a smoother pattern.
So are you saying that learning is like these pattern recognizers in our brains? They refine their connections as we experience new things.
Exactly. And just like learning to ride a bike, the more we repeat a pattern, the stronger those connections become.
Like recognizing a friend's face. You've seen their face from different angles and different lighting. Maybe they got a new haircut.
But our brain doesn't store a separate image for every single variation, right?
That would be a lot of faces.
That's where redundancy comes in. Instead of one copy, the brain stores multiple variations of a pattern.
Like having backup copies of a file, just in case one gets corrupted.
Perfect analogy. That redundancy helps us recognize things even when they're not exactly the same as we've seen before. It's also a big part of memory.
So how does memory work in this whole pattern recognition framework? Is there a specific pattern recognizer for every memory?
It's not quite that straightforward. Memories aren't stored in isolation. They're spread across networks of these pattern recognizers.
It's more like a web of associations rather than a filing cabinet with labels for each memory.
More like a web, yeah. Think about describing your favorite song. You might remember the melody, the lyrics, a specific instrument, maybe even a memory associated with the first time you heard it.
Right, so many different aspects to that one memory.
Those different pieces are probably stored in different parts of the brain, but linked together by this overall pattern of your favorite song.
Okay, that makes sense. But we experience so much every day. How does our brain choose what to remember and what to forget?
Well, Kurzweil argues that the brain is very efficient, operating on this principle of optimal resource allocation. It's just not practical, not even possible to remember everything.
Our brains are kind of like a spam filter for our memories, deciding what's important and what's junk.
Exactly. And that filtering, it's heavily influenced by emotional significance and novelty. We remember things that were emotionally intense, whether good or bad, and things that were new or surprising.
That explains why I can remember the lyrics to that silly song from my childhood, but I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
It all comes down to those patterns. And all this learning and memory, it's happening through the interaction of those millions of pattern recognizers, constantly firing, creating these complex patterns of activity. Kurzweil actually says that those patterns, that's the language of thought.
Wait, you're saying our thoughts aren't language-based? Not in the way we usually think about them.
It's a big idea. He's saying that thoughts are represented by these complex patterns of neural activity, not just strings of words in our heads.
So it's less like reading a book and more like listening to a symphony.
That's a great way to put it. All these different instruments and melodies blending together. And that leads to some pretty big questions, like, if our thoughts are just these complex patterns firing, what does that even mean for consciousness? Is it just a really, really complex pattern, or is there something more to it?
Wow, those are some huge questions. It makes you wonder if figuring out these patterns can help us understand, maybe even replicate consciousness.
Yeah.
But before we go too far down that road, I have another question. We've been talking about the neocortex, but we have that other part of our brain too, right? The old brain.
The one that handles emotions, instincts, all the basic survival stuff.
Exactly. How does that fit into this whole pattern recognition thing?
It's a key part of the picture. While the neocortex might be the seat of our higher level thinking, it doesn't work in isolation. It's constantly communicating with that old brain.
Okay, so we have this super sophisticated pattern recognizer, the neocortex, and this old brain that's more about instincts and emotions. How do they work together?
Think of it like a car.
A car. Okay, I'm intrigued.
The neocortex, that's the driver, making decisions, figuring out where to go. But the old brain, that's the engine.
Providing the power, the drive.
Exactly. It's responsible for our basic urges like hunger, thirst, that fight or flight response.
So it's like the old brain is the gas pedal and the brakes, and the neocortex is the steering wheel.
Pretty much. And just like a car needs both to work right, our brains need both the neocortex and the old brain in harmony.
That makes sense. But sometimes it feels like those emotions, they hijack our rational thinking. We make decisions based on fear, anger, even love, even when we know it's not the most logical choice.
That's because that old brain, it has a powerful influence.
Yeah.
Our emotions can override our rational thinking, especially in those fight or flight situations.
So how does the neocortex deal with all those emotional signals coming from the old brain?
Well, it's not totally helpless. Even though the old brain generates those raw emotions, the neocortex can learn to recognize and understand them, giving us some control over our emotional responses.
It's like learning to speak the language of the old brain. So instead of just reacting instinctively, we can pause, analyze our emotions, and make a more thoughtful choice.
That's the idea. And this back and forth between the two, that's what makes human behavior so complex and fascinating. We're not just these perfectly rational beings. We're driven by this mix of logic, emotion, and instinct.
It's a really interesting picture of how our brains work. But I'm curious about something. We've talked about pattern recognition, learning, memory, emotions. What about those other things, those really human things like creativity, talent, even love? Are those just patterns firing in our brains too? It seems like they're more than just that.
Those are excellent questions, and they get right to the heart of what makes us human.
So should we dive into those? The truly extraordinary aspects of the human mind. All right, let's get into it then. Creativity, talent, love, these big ideas, these really human things, where do they fit in with all this pattern recognition stuff?
It's really fascinating. Kurzweil, he suggests that talent, aptitude, it starts with a mix of nature and nurture.
Nature and nurture, the classic combo.
He says that while the basic pattern recognition algorithm is the same throughout the neocortex, certain regions might be, well, slightly optimized for certain types of patterns.
So some people are just born with a better brain for music or math or language, like they have a better processor for that type of information.
It could be like that, yeah. Through evolution and genetics, certain areas of the brain might be better at processing certain types of information. So someone with a knack for music might have a better ability to recognize rhythmic patterns or those harmonic structures.
But even if you're born with that predisposition, you still need the right environment to develop it, right?
Absolutely. Practice and environment are crucial. It's like you could have a high-performance engine, but you still need the right fuel and training to get the most out of it.
Makes sense. I guess Mozart wouldn't be Mozart without his dad, a skilled musician himself, immersing him in music from a young age.
Exactly. It makes you think about all the potential Mozarts and Einsteins out there who never had the chance to develop their talents.
It's a bit mind-blowing, really. But what about creativity? That spark that lets people come up with these groundbreaking ideas, seeing the world in a whole new way. How does that work?
Kurzweil argues that creativity is basically pattern recognition, but on a whole other level.
Another level, huh?
He says our brains are always creating metaphors, finding those hidden connections between things that seem completely unrelated.
So it's not just recognizing those existing patterns. It's about making new ones, making those connections, seeing things in unexpected ways.
Exactly. And the neocortex, with all those pattern recognizers, it's perfect for that. With millions of patterns flying around, our brains are always looking for those new and interesting
I'm
connections.
starting to see creativity less like a light bulb suddenly switching on
Yeah.
and more like a kaleidoscope, taking those existing pieces and rearranging them to see all sorts of new patterns and possibilities.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Kurzweil suggests that to boost creativity, we need to encourage that process of making connections, challenging those assumptions, exploring different points of view.
It makes me wonder if we could actually train our brains to be more creative, to get better at making those patterns.
It's an interesting idea, for sure.
But there's one more big piece of the puzzle: love. How does Kurzweil even approach something as complex and nuanced as love through this pattern recognition lens. It seems almost impossible.
It's a tough one, no doubt. But he suggests that love, just like all emotions, comes from patterns of neural activity.
Patterns again, huh?
But what makes love different, it's the depth, the complexity, the way it connects us to something bigger than ourselves.
So love is like a super strong, really meaningful pattern, one that just resonates deep within our brains.
You could say that, yeah. And Kurzweil argues that love isn't just some fleeting feeling. It's a basic drive, something that's helped our species survive.
It's weird to think that something as, well, subjective and mysterious as love could be rooted in our biology and the way our brains handle patterns.
It really shows how our physical and emotional experiences are connected. What's even more interesting is how Kurzweil connects love to this idea of transcendence. He says that love, real love, it allows us to connect to something beyond ourselves, to feel a sense of unity, of being connected to everything.
So love isn't just about romance, it's about expanding our sense of self, feeling connected to something bigger, whether it's another person, a community, all of humanity even.
That's the idea, and this circles back to Kurzweil's vision of the future, where technology and human intelligence merge, where artificial neocortexes boost our abilities, where we might even achieve a kind of collective consciousness, sharing knowledge and connecting with each other in ways we can't even imagine now.
It's a pretty incredible, almost a little scary vision of the future. But part of me wonders, if we reduce everything to patterns, even love, do we lose some of the magic, the mystery of being human?
That's a really important point. Even if we can understand how these things work, it doesn't make them any less powerful or complex. Understanding how a flower grows doesn't make it any less beautiful.
This deep dive into Kurzweil's How to Create a Mind, it's been, well, it's been a lot to take in. We've explored these surprisingly simple ideas behind our complex brains, the interplay between the old brain and the neocortex, even the possibility of creating AI that could be smarter than us. It's definitely raised some big questions about consciousness, free will, and what it means to be human.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's not about finding all the answers. It's about asking those questions, pushing the boundaries of what we know.
If our minds are really these massive networks of pattern recognizers, what does that mean for our future? What new patterns will we create? What new possibilities will we unlock? Those are questions I think we all need to be thinking about. Thanks for joining us on this journey.